We're into episode 5 of True Detective Night Country, and this series is just a cheap suit of season 1. It pales in comparison to really any of the predecessors. 2 and 3 had more ambition than this thing. It's terrible writing, terrible plot, and no direction. So, this and many other things I'll discuss about this abomination of a series. So Issa Lopez is a showrunner for this season. And a way she tries to make her season valid already is to state that this is going to be tied in somehow to season 1. And she does that right off the bat with a very, very thinly veiled quote of the King in Yellow. And then we go into her world of Alaska, which is, dark. It's in the winter, very dark, very mysterious. You could think that's reference to the environment itself, what kind of effect it'll have on people, you know, the sort of things, corruption of men's souls. Could have been a very interesting premise, but her Alaska just is not a good way to build a world. It's very clumsy how she's doing it. It just seems devoid of any sort of character, any sort of theme, any sort of feel to it. She uses like a few devices to try to get us in. She takes elements of the thing. She uses spirits. She's trying to establish that it's connected to some sort of spiritual world. But so far, that's had no bearing. How this world has moved forward, it really hasn't broadened this world. It's done nothing for it. And I just think it's cheap. Okay, then we get to Ennis. It's the primary setting of this show. It's a fictional town, and immediately we're shown the Inuit population and mostly the women population of the native tribes. And they seem to be the strength, the culture of the people. They're really the only focus. And they seem to be the ones that hold on, to their heritage, to their legends, to their stories. And it's just funny because when, the tie in to one starts popping up, which is the circle marks, the Caracosa. There's a woman, Rose, who we're introduced to, but she's obviously not a native. She's white, and but she's lived in Alaska, for quite some time. But she actually explains the meaning of the circle marks that are supposed to be some ancient evil that she even refers that were there even before the ice. And she explains this all to Evangeline Navarro, who is supposedly a native. And you just, it just falls flat right there that, this woman from outside their culture is explaining their own culture to them. And there's a few references of this throughout the show, but that one's pretty obvious. And, getting back to the old Caracosa stuff, just terrible, terrible, throw that in to this show because when you see that immediately, it invokes, from season 1, not just the Childress and that, but the whole world, the deep south, the legends, the mystery, the darkness, the evil that seemed to permeate that land. That was the swamp, that was the heat, that was the heaviness. it was in those people. They were depressed. You could really feel it. There were references made to the air, the taste of aluminum. The air was, like polluted from the industry. So, you get that sense of corruption, uh, that that circle of corruption and conspiracy. And that was what made season one so good, was they built that world. This one of Alaska, of whatever it's supposed to be, I really don't know yet. It's just so many things, but nothing is stuck, and it's just really not very well done. So let's talk about the murder mystery, or supposed murder mystery, that was supposed to be the basis of this season, because you and me and everybody else thought this was about missing scientists, and they're being discovered, their bodies being discovered frozen in the ice. And that was going to be the whole murder mystery of the season to solve. But that just seems to have been, a big old bait and switch. Because with Raymond, who was, the one we saw in the beginning, who was with the scientist, one of the scientists, and he's the one that uttered the famous line, "She's awake," and then the lights went out. They've been searching for him, but then he was tied to this Annie Kotak, who's a 7-year-old murder mystery that now is the murder mystery, the real murder mystery of the show. Because nothing new was learned about the missing scientists. The story was not moved forward in any way concerning them. It was all slowly and not so subtly pushed towards Annie Kotak, the midwife, activist, Inuit woman of the village, who all the other Inuit women of the village seem to somehow taken on her cause, her spirit, by protesting and being active against the mine, which that's a whole nother plot device that hasn't even been thought out since the first episode. So it's all very convoluted. It's very confusing. It's just poor writing, very, very poor uh, moving forward. And it's just very confusing. And I think there were hints of this in the first episode when Liz was going through the men's belongings at the research station. And there was a quick shot of a copy of Blood Meridian, which I guarantee you, Issa Lopez just took that as the surface references of that book are, horrible treatment of natives. It's a very brutal book. It's a very violent book, and there's a lot of descriptions of a lot of atrocities against natives. Well, that's kind of where it's turned. So it looks like the scientists were just used as a vehicle to get to the atrocities against the native women. And Annie Kotak is, the symbol of that. And it's just really, really, a bait and switch. And it has nothing to do with, what the spirit of True Detective. And I just think it's just really a shame. The character development is really bad in this season, because essentially you have two main characters, both women, who are exactly the same character. and just two-dimensional at best. Um, True Detective as a show, even in the worst seasons, I'd say season 2 is probably still considered the worst. You had varying characters. Each one was different. They were multi-layered. Season 1, of course, is the best. And, Rust and Marty. How could you have any different people, different characters, multi-dimensional, multifaceted, both of them in their own unique ways, different, but together that's what made it such a great show, was the interaction of these two characters. You had the nihilism of Rust, and Marty was just kind of the company man, the married guy, but he had his little bangs on the side. He was a good old boy. And the interaction between those two is just, I think, the best, probably in the history of television. And what you get here in this Night Country, as it's called, I wish it was just called Night Country, because I do not see it as a true detective series. Is you get Jodie Foster and Callie Reese play Liz Danvers and Evangeline Navarro, respectively. And they're two women, which, that should be fine, but they're the exact same women, really. They're different in appearance only, but their characters are exactly the same. They're both just unlikable, both pretty grumpy, both have really, really bad sexual history, uh, incompetency, because Evangeline is driven by the murder of Annie Kotox. That seems to be her entire drive to find the murderer. And this is like becoming a cold case. It's been 7 years on. She never advanced that case forward, even from the beginning. She's not doing anything to help it now. She has no concept of how to gather evidence, how to question suspects. Evangeline is just kind of a menace to that community. Honestly, she has bursts of rage. Uh, the whole Annie thing is what's made her this defender of women, which she takes out as her cause. And we that's how we're introduced to her. She's a girl boss. And she basically shuts one guy down to beat the shit out of another guy. And then she has a sense of vengeance to her, because she goes after the same abuser guy a couple times. She pours alcohol in his gas tank because she overhears him speaking of what he's going to do to his girlfriend when he gets home, which, by the way, she was defending that woman, but she's still with the abuser. um and then she attacks the same man later on, completely unprovoked, as a law enforcement officer. And she does get the shit kicked out of her, which, I was like, she should have, because she attacked a citizen that wasn't doing, he was drunk, but he flipped her off, but he wasn't doing anything. She's shown this ineptness and this complete dereliction of duty many times in this show. And yeah, she's just a terrible character. Jodie Foster is a little more likable, I would say, but not much. Again, she's grumpy all the time. Seems pretty inept. Hasn't really come up with any sort of investigative knowledge or clues to, uh, find who the murderer, the scientists were. Her big revelation was the mayo on the sandwiches and the wash in the washing machine, to how many days it had been since the scientist disappeared. Other than that, I haven't seen her really put too much work with investigative skill into that. It's been Peter that has really carried the load of the investigative work in that department for any of the cases. For all the police work so far, Peter's the one that's come up with the biggest discoveries. But Liz, yeah, she just seems inept in her own way. She's racist. Uh, she comes her her past is she was married or with a man and had a son with a native man, and they died in a car crash, I believe, caused by a drunk driver. Might have been her. I'm still kind of vague on that one, but they are dead, and that seems to have caused a lot of her issues. So she has her stepdaughter Leia with her, and she doesn't want her engaging in with the women in terms of discovering her culture. She's very racist towards the people, and actually, this theme of racism comes up in this show, which True Detective was never so blunt with it like this season is. It was hinted at, of course. It's always been there, but it was handled more uh, with class and skillful, and in a way, people should bring the subject matter about. This is just in your face. This is just blunt. It's rude. Uh, like I said, both Liz and Evangeline shows racist tendencies, with Evangeline just, talking about the murder of, again, that she was unable to solve, but she blames it on race. That if Annie had been white, it would have been solved. Uh, Even though, she made a big deal about being the one that was going to solve it, but yet she's laying the blame game. Uh, with Liz and her racism towards the natives. So, yeah, both women are just really terrible people. And again, I mentioned their sexual history. Well, Liz is just pretty much sleeps around, married men. Uh, it's just a joke, but it's not funny in the show. They try to act like it's a joke, but it's really uncomfortable when it comes up. Her sexual history, which apparently she got her job from sleeping with her boss. She was moved there because of things, but it it switch the roles on that. Switch the roles on that today in any show. There would be outrage. There would be immediate calls for that show to be canceled. Uh, and Evangeline, we get to know her with her man friend. She basically rapes him. Um, they show her in the position of power, atop him, how it's framed, and it's pretty uncomfortable to watch. It's not very appealing. And he tells her, "No, slow down. I want to enjoy it too." And she says basically no, and he tries to put his hands up and his arms up to stop her, and she forcibly puts his arms down, and she finishes, and she's fine. But he seems a little uncomfortable. Like I said, switch the roles on that one. See what happens on TV today. Switch the roles on that. So yeah, they're both not very well plotted out. Okay, what am I getting at here? I guess it's a good time to start summing things up for this show that's just really poorly conceived, poor execution, poor character development, really, really bad world building. And who do I blame this on? Well, this is squarely on the shoulders of Issa Lopez, who I already had a little heads up going in when Nick Pizzolatto stated he wanted nothing much to do with this show. In fact, I don't really think he wanted it to be considered a true detective. They should have just gone with Night Country and not, put it into that mythos. But they did because, like I said, they needed that sort of recognition, that sort of heft that title brings to really carry this show. And that's the only reason it's a true detective. And who is really the enemy of this show? At the we're coming up to the last episode. I really don't care. I don't care who the man, the physical enemy, or if there's a character even portrayed as the enemy. We have Caracosa going on. We have the mind now. We have so many things overriding one another. I really don't care at all what Issa Lopez comes up with in terms of a physical enemy or entity or murderer responsible in this show, because the true enemy in this show, or the true evil, is men. Issa Lopez has made it very clear that the men are the enemy. They're to be disrespected, and it's how she's treated these characters. All the men are just kind of bumbling idiots. I mean, Hank is prime example. From the very beginning, you know, he was disrespected. He was made to look like a corrupt. He was made to look like a doof. Uh, she involved him in some sort of catfishing scheme that made no sense. Um, it just made him look like a real poor sad sack. Um, all the men are just not very well done. They're one dimensional. They're especially the abuser. We've seen him a few times. He's just your typical loudmouth, typical abusive type, very one dimensional. That's how she sees most men. That's how they treat women. He's representative of how men generally, she thinks, treats women. Um, the party to go find Raymond, I guess the posse that Hank organized, that Navarro basically called a bunch of, backwoods rednecks. I mean, that's your typical man character on this show. They were just a bunch of, go get them. Let's, like a sort of a KKK rally type, let's get them. Just very simple, very cheap, very crass. Just not very good development there. And so Peter, well, Peter's the best of the bunch. He's actually the best character in the whole show. But of course, he had to be taken down, and he has now. And no surprises, what they did in defending of Liz, and because he's been used as her little boy toy basically. And he gets no respect from his wife, who we found out now never wanted to have his child. Um, Even though he seems to be the only one has a really decent job in supporting his family, but he gets treated with zero respect. Uh, Leia calls him an asshole after she gets put in prison or jail for the rally that made no sense. She was protesting, and he gives her a bag of chips because she's hungry. But then right afterward, he basically gets called an asshole. So he's just treated terribly by all the women, and now the lead woman of this show, Issa Lopez, is now he's a murderer. Now he's the worst of the worst. Now he's been relegated to the, you know, basically whoever is supposed to be the murderer in the show. He's at that level now in terms of character. He killed his own father, Hank, in defense of Liz, basically in defense of, who the real hero of this show is, and that would be feminism. Because feminism is the driving force of this abomination. All the women in this show have zero accountability. There's zero repercussions for their actions. And the ratings are starting to show that it's not a good message. This is just True Detective hijacked. And that's about it. Hey, thanks for watching. I think I'm going to go watch me some season 1 now. Be talking to you soon. Take care. Bye bye.